Welcome back to West Texas View.
Dr. Brownbill from Manchester, England, is here working with our research scientists at the Texas Tech University Health Science Center. And they are working on a really interesting project, fetus and placentas. And tell us exactly what that means and how do you do that?
So what's important to our health as babies, as children, as adults in later life is our time in the womb. And that time that's spent in the womb is a little bit like the orchestration of a classical piece of music. And the placenta is at the center of trying to orchestrate processes during the development of the fetus. It's the interchange between the mum's circulation of blood and the fetus's circulation of blood. And if you imagine you wanted to build a shack in your garden, in your home, you'd go to the hardware store. The hardware store is the place where you have your demands and your requirements at one side of the counter, and on the opposite side of the counter you have all the things that you need to build this shack. So it's very important to buy these products at different stages of the building of the shack, and it's really important to make sure that you select the right things to make that construction. So if you imagine that analogy of a fetus that's developing from just a few balls of cells that's been implanted into the womb, into the wall of the womb, and then you imagine two circulatory systems that are taking and bringing nutrients. The blood doesn't mix between the mum and the baby, but there's a very fine barrier. And this very fine barrier is involved in cherry picking the right things from mum's blood, the nutrients, the oxygen, and it's orchestrated by a hormone system which regulates the way that this happens. And there's some very specialist processes that happen in a placenta to ensure that the baby stays alive, it starts to grow at the right rate and develops in the correct manner, that the brain develops in the right manner so that you come out as a person who's able to learn in the world, and that you've got a good state of health.
And if there's anything that happens in that process, then you have a defect in the child.
So there are lots of ways in which a defect can happen. So if you imagine an orchestra again with a conductor conducting things in a perfect manner, it just takes one move and a few instruments to be offbeat for just a few seconds for that piece not to be so perfect. And this is reflected in the way that nutrients transport across the placenta, the way that the cardiovascular system develops within the fetus, the brain, the way that cell sheets move and glide to form arms, limbs and fingers. And any interruption to that process can lead to a problem.
And the intricacy of all of this makes you just absolutely astounded at the miracle of birth and the miracle of a child growing in a womb.
We never have all the answers, and the more that we study into this, the more questions that this then generates. But we do progress. We do find strategies and ways of trying to overcome defects. It's really important to maintain a healthy lifestyle as a pregnant mother, but sometimes women don't realise they're pregnant until 10 weeks into pregnancy.
And some damage has already been done. Drinking, smoking, trauma.
Yeah, that could be a problem. And it's also a problem for the pharmaceutical industry to try to risk assess whether it's drugs that are given to the mother to help chronic illnesses, whether they are actually going to cross the placenta and cause some unknown damage to the fetus. So some of our later developments has been along the line of thinking about trying to study these things in a very global manner, which takes us away from our areas of specialism to a degree, but brings forward the technologies we've already got and makes it useful to industry and also to understand about the environment. And we call this the exposome, and I'm not going to try to use jargon, but I'll just try to explain that exposome is exposure to the human being of everything around it and the way that it may affect the way that you develop.
And how everything affects that. But so your primary focus, you're working with the fetus and the placenta, but your primary focus is to see how medicines affect?
Yes.
Or is that too much of a specialization to say that?
This is the importance of translational medicine in research, So, but first of all, we need to understand what's gone wrong. So a lot of the ground basic science that we need to do in trying to understand the placenta and the way it functions and how that changes across the whole of gestation with pregnancy is a really important piece of basic information. And from this we can identify, by studying pregnancies perhaps with normal healthy growth versus pregnancies where women have been shown to have their fetus growth drop off. And if we study these two groups together, perhaps we can find differences and pinpoint the exact problem that goes on with all of these processes in the placenta. And with this knowledge we can come up with ideas for new drugs that could target and correct those problems. But you know, we have to be really careful about the safety of medicines in pregnancy. So some of the most inventive ideas is to think about nutritional changes as well, because they're much safer to give to a pregnant lady, and everybody feels better for doing that, not taking any risks. But there are pharmaceuticals out there that need to be given to pregnant women during pregnancy. So if you're a woman who has epileptic seizures, or maybe you've got chronic bowel disorder with really bad spates of inflammation, you really want to carry on taking some medication even though you're pregnant. So we're left with this real, initially a risky venture with pharmaceuticals, but with our help to try to clarify whether or not those drugs are going to be safe or dangerous before they're given to pregnant women.
How they affect each stage of the fetus and the placenta.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got some real novel new ideas for this, for the industry.
Well, I had a friend that had migraine headaches, and some of the medications she took for the migraine headaches she had to stop when she got pregnant.
Sure.
And it had to do with her hormones. I can't remember what it was, but that was part of the reason she had migraine headaches, was because of her hormone levels.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, with this disease, if mum stops taking the meds during pregnancy, does this risk her life, and therefore does it risk the life of the fetus? If that's the case, then the best thing that the obstetrician can do is give guidance to the patient to consider these risks. So it's a very difficult point in the patient's life to have to weigh this up, but coming off medication could be fatal to a mum, especially with high levels of hypertension or something that they may have, and therefore this balance has to be struck about whether you continue or not for some medications. For other less chronic, less serious diseases, maybe the risk is worthwhile taking to remove yourself from those medications at the moment. But wouldn't it be nice to know about the actual problems that these things may or may not cause?
And before you get pregnant. We're going to have to take another break. We'll be back in just a minute and continue this conversation.
Stay tuned. West Texas View will be right back.